The meeting was at 10 a.m. La reunión era a las 10 de la mañana or la reunión fue a las 10 de la mañana.
How can it be that both of these sentences are correct? Shouldn't it be one or the other? What about this example?
He was a doctor. Él era médico or él fue médico.
Now, these sentences are also both correct, but there's a subtle difference in the meaning. As you can see, using ser in the past tense is difficult for Spanish students because there are two different past tenses, the imperfect tense and the preterite tense. And our hope is that this is the only video you'll ever need to know and understand exactly when you should use which tense when dealing with ser in the past. The examples will start off simple, but by the end you'll understand the complicated ones too.
We'll go over when and why to use ser in the imperfect tense, followed by when and why to use ser in the preterite tense. And finally, we'll see when both forms are correct but have different meanings, like in those first examples.
If you're watching this video, you're probably more at an intermediate level and don't need to see how to conjugate ser in the imperfect and preterite tenses. You already know. And if that's the case, go ahead and jump to the next chapter where we get into all the examples and explanations and all that.
But if you're just starting to study the past tense in Spanish, or you need a little bit of a review, then let's see how to conjugate ser.
First off, ser means to be, and we use ser in Spanish when we're dealing with descriptions, occupations, characteristics, time, origin, or relationships. And you can remember those based on the mnemonic doctor.
Let's first conjugate ser into the imperfect tense. Yo era. Tú eras. Él, ella o usted era. Nosotros, nosotras éramos. Vosotros, vosotras erais. Ellos, ellas, ustedes eran. Okay, now let's conjugate ser into the preterite tense. Yo fui. Tú fuiste. Él, ella o usted fue. Nosotros, nosotras fuimos. Vosotros, vosotras fuisteis. Ellos, ellas, ustedes fueron.
Now remember, in Spanish, the conjugation takes care of who the speaker is. So we don't technically need to explicitly use subject pronouns like yo, él, ustedes, but in this video, we're going to use them just for the sake of completeness. Okay, let's first see how to use ser in the imperfect tense. So remember, the imperfect tense is for descriptions, to talk about things that happened regularly in the past, to talk about things that happened in the past without any specific time frame, no beginning or no ending, or to talk about things that get interrupted. So using the imperfect tense is our way of setting the scene or describing how things used to be.
That's right. So ser as a description would look like the city was small. La ciudad era pequeña.
Right, so here we're just describing how the city used to be. We don't care or it's not important if the city's still small, it's just a description about the past.
She was very kind to everyone. Ella era muy amable con todos.
And this is the same. We're describing that she was very kind sometime in the past. We don't care or it's not important if she still is.
And here there are some examples of ser with no specific time frame. When I was a child, I used to play in the park. Cuando era niño, jugaba en el parque.
So this is something that doesn't have a specific time frame. As a child, I used to play many times in the park, so we need the imperfect.
Before, life was calmer. Antes, la vida era más tranquila.
So we're not talking about a specific time period. Before, life was calmer. It's just a description without a beginning or an end. And sometimes these can be taken as a description or something without a time frame. It doesn't really matter. We're still using it more to set up a scene or talk in general or a description about the past. So we could say something like,
the restaurant was very popular. El restaurante era muy popular.
Yeah, we don't care if it still is. We're just describing or talking about an unknown time frame in the past.
It was a sunny day. Era un día soleado.
So we're not talking about any kind of specific event. It rained yesterday or something like that. We're describing it was a sunny day. We're setting the scene probably to talk more about that specific day.
It was impossible to see in the dark. Era imposible ver en la oscuridad.
So we're describing that it was impossible to see, that it was dark, and we're not talking about a specific action. Now, unlike when we talk about descriptions or unspecified time frames, we're going to use ser in the preterite tense when we talk about specific events or specific time frames. So let's see some examples of like a specific event.
The concert was in Madrid. El concierto fue en Madrid.
So this time we're talking about a specific event. We're not describing something, so we want to use the preterite. Remember, although we use estar for locations, the trick about ser is we always use it for when events occur. So we need ser.
It was a surprise. Fue una sorpresa.
So we're talking about an event. The surprise was an event that happened and it's a completed action. We're not describing something.
It was an important moment in my life. Fue un momento importante en mi vida.
And this is the same. We're talking about the moment was important. It was a specific event, and we're not describing what happened. And with respect to talking about some examples with specific time frames, we could have something like this.
He was president for 4 years. Él fue presidente por 4 años.
So here we're specifying 4 years, a specific time frame. So we need to use the preterite fue.
The meeting was at 3 p.m. La reunión fue a las 3 de la tarde.
So this is a specific event. The meeting happened, but we're also specifying a time frame. It was at 3, so we need to use the preterite.
She was my teacher. Ella fue mi profesora.
Now, this one's a little trickier because we could have used era, but if we use the imperfect, we're describing somebody in the past. This is actually more, we're trying to define that for a time, this person was my professor, even though we don't specify the time. For a time, they were my professor, but we're saying that action is completed, and now they're no longer my professor. So we need to use the preterite. Okay, this is where the topic gets really interesting and really fun.
But first, if you're enjoying this video, please give us a like and subscribe or share this video with other students. Let's see some other examples.
Okay, if we have the sentence, the documents were checked, would that be los documentos eran revisados o los documentos fueron revisados? So we would want to say los documentos fueron revisados because we're not talking about a description. We're talking about a specific event. They were checked. So we need to use the preterite.
Let's see another example. The documents were important. Los documentos eran importantes or los documentos fueron importantes. It should be los documentos eran importantes because in this case, we're describing an object. It's not about an event, it's not about an action, it's not a specific time.
And how about this one? The invitations were bright. So, las invitaciones eran brillantes o las invitaciones fueron brillantes? It should be las invitaciones eran brillantes because we're describing an object. We're not talking about any kind of specific action.
And the last one of these, the invitations were delivered. Las invitaciones eran entregadas or las invitaciones fueron entregadas. It should be las invitaciones fueron entregadas because we're not describing the invitations. We're talking about an event. They were delivered.
Okay, this is the best part of the video for me, where we're only left with a situation where both era and fue could be correct in the same sentence, but they're going to mean something different. Now, this can be really difficult if you're studying a Spanish textbook or something where you're only given like a one-line or one-phrase example. So sometimes we're going to need more context to really understand when to use era or fue. So we're going to look at a few examples here where either one is technically correct. It just depends on what you want to express.
Let's go back to our first example. The meeting was at 10 a.m. La reunión era a las 10 de la mañana or la reunión fue a las 10 de la mañana. Both are correct, but if we use fue like la reunión fue a las 10 de la mañana, it was an event that took place at a specific time and is now a completed action. Simple.
Now, as we said, you can use era in the sentence like la reunión era a las 10 de la mañana. But because era is more for setting up a scene or for descriptions, we actually would need more information here. We need more context. So the full context could look something like this. The meeting was at 10 a.m., but my boss canceled it, and now I have to reschedule it for Thursday.
La reunión era a las 10 de la mañana, pero mi jefe la canceló y ahora tengo que reprogramarla para el jueves.
So this is a great example of when we're setting up the scene with era a las 10 de la mañana, when an action, a specific action of the preterite, he canceled it, happened.
Another example. He was a doctor. Él era médico or él fue médico. Both are correct.
That's right. But when we say él era médico, we're talking about his description. We're describing his occupation, and especially in an unspecified time frame. So we don't care, or it's not important if he still is a doctor. We're just describing the past. However, if we say él fue médico, this focuses not on describing his profession as a doctor, but that for a specific time, although we don't know when, he was a doctor and now he no longer is one. Now, with professions and occupations, I just want to make one really quick note here that I've had a lot of conversations with Darcy and with other Spanish speakers, and the subtlety is really difficult when dealing with era and fue for occupations, because never before our generation, I feel like people didn't change jobs. So if you're describing a job, it was always the imperfect. It's always él era médico because you have that job for your whole life. Our parents, our grandparents, they didn't really change jobs, but now that's kind of happening. In fact, my case was I was an engineer, era ingeniero, and I'm still an engineer, but now I don't work as an engineer, I do something else. So it can be very subtly tricky even for native speakers, whether I should say era ingeniero or fui ingeniero, right?
Yeah.
So be careful with that, and sometimes you might hear people use it interchangeably. So if you need to ask more questions, like, you just don't work as that anymore or whatever, it's totally okay to ask. Okay, what about this one?
The exam was hard. El examen era difícil or el examen fue difícil.
Okay, so with this one, if we say el examen fue difícil, we're talking about a specific event. We're talking about taking the exam. It's now a completed action. It's done, it's over, and we thought it was difficult. Now, if you were to say el examen era difícil, it's a description of the exam, and we can't say it quite so simply. We need more context. So you could say something like this. The exam was difficult because the questions were more complicated than what I thought, and that's why I failed it.
El examen era difícil porque las preguntas eran más complicadas de lo que pensaba y por eso reprobé.
So here, we're describing that the exam was difficult, and we're describing that the questions were complicated, all to set up the action of that's why I failed it.
And that's it for this lesson. Thank you all so much for watching.
If this video helped you, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell to get all the notifications for when our next lessons come out. Be sure to head over to Buy Me a Coffee if you'd like to donate to the channel, or you could sign up there for our private Facebook community, and we'll have that link in the description below.
And now watch this video to improve your Spanish.
Until next time.